Hi guys, welcome back to the Astroimaging channel. Tonight's session, the ethics of astroimaging. And no, I'm not saying astroimaging itself is unethical, but as you image, you run across various ethical images, ethical issues. We'll be discussing that and how it kind of branches off into a few different places. That said, before we go into that, I do want to show off our image of the week, which is right here, and it goes to Christopher Gomez for his IC 1848 in the Hubble palette. Very nice image. You can see it on our website under both submissions and where we show off the winners of the image of the week. That's number one. Number two, hold on, let me close out of this window. Number two, I don't know if you're out there, Corey Phillips, or if anybody knows Corey Phillips, please tell him I am looking for him. Somebody wants to contact him about using one of his images for their something or other. Okay, all that said, Alex McConaughey is going to kind of be, I don't want to say moderating, but starting off this discussion. He had a nice email chain going out there, and it stimulated a lot of good conversation that we hope to bring into the room here. So, Alex, I know you're in the room.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. You know, if you go over to Cloudy Nights, you can see a number of arguments going on about what's fair to do and what's not fair to do in astroimaging. And there are some there's room for differences of opinion. If you've ever seen Warren Keller do a presentation comparing PixInsight and Photoshop, he's got this one cute little image of Pixie and what does he call? Anyway, they're having this little argument and everything else like that. And in Photoshop, you can paint all you want. You can change everything you want. And over in PixInsight, it's rumored that, oh no, painting's a horrible sin. So there's plenty of room among people who really know what they're doing about what's right and what's wrong. And what we did was we made up a bunch of statements that people often ask as they are having these arguments. And I've tried to post them in the conversation. Have they gotten there, guys? Can you tell? Because I can see them here.
Not yet. No, I'm going to try to find them.
Okay. It's all together, what, 1,500 words long. So it may be 291 words, but there's more than a couple thousand characters. So it may not be letting me post all that much at once. So I'm going to post it over to Adam. Can you figure out maybe a way to get it posted or anything while I'm doing this? Well, we're going to make some statements here. And we want everybody to get on the conversation here and make your own comments. Meanwhile, those 6 or 8 of us that managed to get into the room are also going to react and give our own personal opinions about these things, remembering these are personal opinions. A couple of things in the way of introduction. At AIC, Eric and I and 250 other imagers were up in San Jose, and Richard Wright gave a very good, entertaining presentation of the issues of astroimaging and the ethical issues. And that caused some things. If Richard was completely right in what he had to say, then I've done some things that are unethical. And I don't generally think I'm an unethical person. And the next morning, what's his name, Keith Allred? Who's an attorney, gave a long presentation about how to protect your images when you're astroimaging from other people ripping them off. And obviously it was very interesting to have that. And actually some of the things that Keith said led us to wonder about certain things. I'm not going to try to quote Keith. I think it's Keith Allred. I'm not going to try to quote Richard because that would probably be unethical, because I haven't talked to him about doing it, and that's apparently one of the things you can't do. But let's start off with the first statement here. is it acceptable among the people here in the room that can chime in to follow other people's workflows in image processing software? If somebody says this is the workflow I used, and you try to do the same thing after they did it, the workflow itself was a creative process, one should think, and you are trying to copy somebody else's creative process. Now, I'm not talking about the people that put out tutorials and say, hey, use this workflow. They're obviously wanting you to copy it. But if somebody else, or you see, he's doing something, is it okay for you to try to copy that? Why don't we ask that question first and have people chime in on that? If you're in the room, go ahead and chime in on that.
Well, how would we know about the work process if they didn't come out and say it in public? How would we know about the work process if they didn't come out and say what it is?
If you were watching them work or something like that.
Oh, just like over their shoulder or something like that.
Or maybe they were saying, hey, this is how I do it, but it's my own special process, and you guys, maybe they're just showing off. Maybe that's just a dumb thing, Anybody got anything
for me,
to say about
if that wasn't the case, I learned everything I know by copying. I didn't invent anything I've done. Okay. I always use the tutorial or copy, especially Eric, I learned half the things I know from Eric. Mm-hmm. Just basically maybe trying to copy what he does or, follow his advice on things like that. So I'm not sure if it's without his knowledge, it's always like he tells me what to do. Sometimes.
I think this is Eric, and I'm sorry, Tolga, you're copying me, but that's your mistake. I think it's the intent of anyone that puts out a process and makes it in any way public is to be a teaching tool and for other people to, if not copy exactly, to learn from it. I think that's the intent, and I can't imagine that's unethical. I mean, certainly it's not a process patent like in manufacture of a drug. It's showing people how to do things. I think that's perfectly ethical. And that's how I learned. That's how I think we all learn.
Anybody got a contrary view? We don't have to walk a dead horse. We all agree kind of that you can. Josh, was that you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that it's helpful if it's something very specialized and you learned it from somewhere to at least share where you got that information. Starless images are pretty widely done now, but for a long time they weren't very widely done, and there was JP who did it, and that was about it. And I think that for a while there, I think maybe it would have made sense to give him credit because he was pretty much the only person doing it. If you are using a special color palette, then it might make sense to give credit to whoever came up with that color palette. I think that I always mispronounce his name, Bob Franke, who did the modified Hubble palette for a while there. I think he was the one who taught everyone how to make stars look like the right color. So I think that those are things that are nice to do, at least, if not maybe required to be ethical. If you do something very specialized, you should be sharing that information, or credit anyways.
Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine anybody, talking about, oh, this is how I do my workflow, and then having somebody else be upset that they're copying it. I want to go back to Mike Witt's comment, though. Mike added something on the list there. Where's let me quote him exactly here. If a workflow is put on a public forum, then the person that shared it should be okay for people to use it. That's certainly logical. But is a workflow substantially different than an image, say? Would the logic that says that, well, if it was put out in public, that it should be okay for other people to use it? That's the logic behind what Mike's saying. Yeah. Well, imagine what that opens up. Let's not talk too much about that because I think we'll have an opportunity to say it over and over again today in the night's discussion. Is it okay to use somebody else's data to enrich your picture?
Would you like me to comment on this one?
Go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, so I yes and no. If they've put their data out there and they've given you permission to use it, then yes. And no matter, first, before I would publish it anywhere publicly, I would ask for their permission. I would also give them full credit for it. That said, what I don't really have a problem with is if someone has put their data out there publicly, and somehow you think that you can practice just using it in the quiet of your own home, then yeah, feel free to do all that stuff. But like I said, don't publish it, don't take credit for it. Basically, tell the truth, and you're going to be fine. But in general, that's my opinion.
Let me just add something short on that. If you get data from some source like the Hubble Space Telescope, there are actually rules. They say if you want to use this data, you should have this reference to the data. And I've done that, and I just include the reference saying this is where I got some of the data to enhance my image. Just follow their rules. And another than that, I agree with you, Adam. I have a number of times asked somebody else if I could use their data to enhance my image, and of course you give them credit. I mean, that's actually the same rule that applies in any kind of scientific publication. If you use someone else's data, you ask their permission and you give them credit.
Yeah, it's the classy thing to do.
Okay.
I would agree with that. But as far as like most of these things that we put out there, some of them are like really like stealing, like, you know, without permission. That's different. But I feel that as long as you ask permission and you give credit to proper everybody, I don't see a problem with anything.
Tolga, let me ask you. You started that statement by saying some of these things we do are like stealing. I'm not sure exactly.
No. I said some of the things that were listed are basically using things without permission.
Oh, yeah. There's common threads running through all of these 18 statements. You know, basically, if you haven't caught on to it yet, there's 18 statements of issues that come up. We've heard people say one thing or another about these things as they go along, and there's 18 of them. And Adam's got one as of 1835. If you look through the notes, you can see it. There are various. I think some of the other guys posted other links as to what they are. So yeah, that's there's going to be common threads.
For instance, this number 2 that we're talking about uses somebody else's data to enrich your picture.
Yeah.
Well, you can just download somebody else's picture without their permission and enrich your picture, or you can ask for permission to say, hey, can I have some of your data to, you know, in blend with my picture. Those are 2 completely different ways of going about it. That's all I meant to say.
Amen. Okay, cool. Let's go on to number 3 here. Can you, this came out of a statement on Cloudy Nights, actually, where the thread was about whether it was, whether using a rentoscope produces your image, or if you've got to, you know, or what. But if you use a rentoscope, can you claim that image as your own, even if the data was from a borrowed or rented scope?
Yeah, I'd have to say, well, what does ownership of the equipment have to do with it? As far as I'm concerned, absolutely nothing.
Is there anybody that would disagree with that, including whoever was posting on Cloudy Nights 6 months ago, and to that very effect?
You want to read it? What is the claim here? What is the position?
The claim, as I remember it, was whether using a rentoscope was ethical. If you don't own the equipment, if you don't go to the work of you know, putting it together and setting it up and doing all that stuff, you really haven't done the work of astroimaging, was the analysis as far as I could remember from the website. So is there anybody of the 8 people we've got here and the 20, how many people? 17 speakers, 13 viewers listed out there on the chat. Is there anybody that would go along with that statement?
I would completely disagree with that statement.
Yeah, I don't think that's even an ethics. There are 2 statements. One, claim an image as your own, even if the data was from a borrowed or rented scope. Or is it unethical to produce an image with a borrowed or rented scope? In other words, since we're not doing the work, but I look at those 2 as kind of separate. The ethical issue would come down to one thing to me, and that really is kind of a legal thing where, are there any terms of service that come along with renting that scope that prevent me from claiming that final image as my own? Otherwise, no. I mean, we rent scopes all across the country and all across the world so that we could hit skies that we couldn't normally hit here. What we do is we produce pretty pictures. And the picture, that final image is basically what we're after. And I don't think ownership of the scope really is that important. If you rent a camera, if you rent a DSLR and you go take a photo of the Statue of Liberty, does that mean that that photo is any less yours?
Okay, that's the ownership. But what if somebody else is setting up polar aligning, getting all that stuff ready, and you're paying them their $60, $100 an hour to take the...
But that's how all this is done on the scientific level. People are always using Keck, and they're using Hubble, and they're using all these instruments that don't necessarily belong to them, but they cite, you know, where the data came from.
Right. As long as, again, this goes back to what I said. As long as I think borrowing a camera like a DSLR, what Adam's example, or like I can borrow your whole equipment, your mount and your camera and your telescope, go set it up myself, and then take a picture. In that case, I don't know if you ethically, not legally, I don't know if you deserve any credit in that image. But if you're setting it up and then I'm using your telescope, I think, in my opinion, I should give you credit.
Okay, so it seems like the people who are in the room are saying either, no, you own it outright, free and clear, or, you know, yeah, you own it, you can do what you want with it because you paid for the time on the telescope, but you should acknowledge probably that it came from Rent-A-Scope or something like that. But there are, Max Moreau, for instance, says that he disagrees, and I can see his argument. Effort matters, and I don't mean to speak for him because he's got to type it into the comment section, but it should be noted for those of you who don't have access to the comment sections later on. Max further points out that if it's not your stuff, you're getting the images from a commercial observatory, and it's not an ownership. And
yeah, I'll chime in on that, Alex, too.
Yeah.
I think the root of this all comes down in the conversation isn't generally about whether it's ethical. I think a lot of the conversations happen when it comes to awards and recognition, not necessarily whether it's ethical. I don't think people have any problems with people processing other people's data or getting the data from somewhere else, but it seems like it's always come down to whether or not that image should count as an APOD or an Astrobin image of the day or whatever other award you might talk about. And I think that's kind of the more debatable thing, is how much credit you should get if you skip that part. And some people take it as far as, well, you didn't set it up on your own and fight through the the cold nights up in the north and sit outside with it. And there's just a wide swath of kind of gray area there where you could do some work or a ton of work or all the work or none of the work, and that's where the conversation usually seems to come from, rather than being an ethical one. It's how fair is it to have competition or recognition for your images when it wasn't your setup that did it.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a difference, in fact, when I thought that the sentiment in the room is that it really doesn't matter.
I'm not saying I didn't share opinion one way or another. I'm saying that is where that conversation usually came from. is talking
Well,
about
fairness
that.
is a different topic than what's ethical.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm not talking about who's going to get sued for using my data or anything like that. I'm talking about when we're sitting in a room together with other astroimagers and somebody says, yeah, sure, they're great pictures, but he got them off a rentoscope.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is that
Well,
that's where
fairness,
the heated debate usually comes from.
Yeah, there's a lot more glory to capturing it yourself, but
right, but yeah, exactly. So fairness, you could say that somebody who's using a Takahashi FSQ versus somebody who's using a Orion 80 ED, it's not fair to, if somebody owns a Takahashi, a $5,000 telescope and somebody owns an $800 telescope, it's not fair.
Yeah,
It doesn't
I don't think we measure how ethical something is by the quality of the equipment or how much we suffered acquiring that data to do the processing, or how much effort we put in to put it in the processing itself. The way to handle it is the way Josh said. You give credit for those people that are involved in some reasonable way in the production of that final image. And, speaking for myself, Mel sets up everything at the SRO. I have never touched it. So he gets credit on every image, and the SRO gets credit for the location on the posting on Astrobin, and that's the way that's handled, and that makes everything ethical. If I didn't do that, then that might be unethical.
Yeah, I basically look at, let's say, having someone else set up your scope and do it remotely as perfectly ethical, right up until the point where you say, oh, I set up the scope, or it's my telescope, or whatever it may be. I mean, that's the point where you cross that ethical line in my mind.
Okay.
I think if you wanted to get into a really interesting moral/philosophical discussion, to me, what's important is the target and adjusted the composition and camera angle and such. That's where the artistry comes in. Nothing to do with whose equipment it is.
Okay. The fourth statement, is it okay to combine frames taken at very different times together? They're different types of targets, or no, the question may be different for different types of targets. But is it okay to combine from various other places? Obviously, it's not a problem with anybody here.
I've never heard that to be an issue.
Yeah, me neither. Okay. For those of you who are wondering, I'm reading from a list. I'm not sure the list is available anyplace, but what happened was that when we were trying to plan this week, we said, what statements do you hear about what's fair, not fair, ethical, not ethical, legal, not legal in astroimaging? Let's just put them up there and see what whoever wants to talk has something to say about it. Okay, and that list grew from 5 good rules for astroimagers to I think what we up to 17, 18, something like that. We're reading from that list, and we sent this list out to all the people who've ever presented on the Astroimaging channel, and they added more. In some cases, what they added were rewording of things we already said, and we tried to edit that down. But these are just thought starters, okay? So, so I don't think anybody really has any problem with taking images at different frames, different nights, and everything else. So let's go from there.
Alex, that was my statement, and perhaps it would be helpful if I gave you the particular that it came from. It came from photographing the eclipse last August. A friend of mine did a wide field shot where he had a fixed tripod that he was shooting, partial eclipse with the filter, and then during totality, took the filter off to include foreground, landscape. Okay.
Okay.
And I was interested in doing the same thing, but where I was, there wasn't any interesting foreground stuff. So I could capture the sun and capture the mentality that if I wanted to have an interesting foreground, I was going to have to take that picture at a different time and place. And my friend thought that that was unethical.
Wait a minute. At a different time and place or different place?
Well, yeah, if you wanted to make the conversation interesting, you can consider either. In my case, it would have to have been both different time and place.
Okay, let's remove it from Greg's moral dilemma to just a general dilemma. Let's say that you want to put an eclipsed sun in a landscape. Is that okay?
You
Is
mean
that
eclipse sun?
An eclipsed sun.
An eclipsed sun with the background of New York City.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what's popping into my head.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Why not?
And call it an astro image or call it an image?
So
I don't know, as long as you're not portraying that it actually happened, but you're kind of going down that road.
I think you're being a little bit intellectually dishonest unless you are really disclosing it. People are going to see that image, and then you're going to have the next Mars is going to be...
Mars is bigger than the moon.
Right, right. So you just have to be careful with stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I don't think, and it also, intent is also, has to be taken into consideration. Did you really wish that the eclipse was going to happen over New York City? And are you just doing, or are you doing it because you want to actually fool someone? But I think we have to remember who our audiences are, and you want our audiences to at least learn something from this. And you don't want them to learn the wrong thing. You don't want to teach them the wrong thing, I guess.
And for those of you who don't have access to the conversation, you're watching it later on YouTube or something like that, Linda Thomas Fowler has pointed out very succinctly, if that kind of compositing is passed off as photojournalism, then no, it's not okay. Well, I'm adding things here. If it's art, then sure, go for it. If you want to make a picture.
Well, I actually know a photo just like this, where there was a picture taken of a supermoon that was superimposed over a background of Philadelphia skyline. And the two images were not taken at the same time, at the same place. So it's an artistic image with the background of Philadelphia with a gigantic moon behind it. And it's not accurate, but it looks nice.
How about maybe something that's not quite so black and white like that, where you take a picture of a target from either a different time or place in space. So there's a couple different examples of that. I think that maybe it was last year there was an APOD where Saturn and the moon or Jupiter and the moon were occulting each other, and somebody said it was from a certain date with a single shot or something like that, and then it ended up being that they weren't actually in the right time and place. They were close, but they weren't really right there. And then another one would be like if you're shooting a comet going through a galaxy or something like that, and you can't get a really good galaxy picture with a couple of shots because you can't get deep enough. So you might add your galaxy picture from the next couple of nights, and then clearly the comet's not really there, so that's not really at the same place. Those are interesting ones too, where I think it's less clear what the right answer is there.
Okay. We've got different opinions, and I think it depends a lot on what your intent is and how you explain it. Just remember that the explanations can sometimes get separated from the pictures, and people don't read the explanations. So you may need to tread warily around that. Next one is it okay to alter somebody else's image to improve it?
Only if invited, I would say.
You might make sure you're not being rude by doing it. Everyone's trying to learn, so if you're gonna grab an image, put it into Photoshop, and tweak it and say, hey, look what I was able to do with your data, then maybe you're being a little bit rude. But if you say, hey, do you mind if I give it a shot, see if I can get anything else out of it, and I'll show you what I did, then you're all good.
It happens rather regularly on cloudy nights.
If you never do anything with the photo, then that's why I do that all the time. People post a picture, and I say, I wonder what I can do with that. And I play with it, and I throw it away.
Mm-hmm. What you do in the secrecy of your own desktop computer is up to you. Mm-hmm. So, but is it okay to show somebody, show some of your buddies and say, well, look how I improved it. Is that cool?
No, I don't think it is. But I have seen posted images where it looks like processing was not as good as the data might have been. In which case, I've sent private messages to that individual suggesting that I might take a run at that data. There might be some things to learn, but only privately. And only if that person responds positively and said, yeah, I would like to, then they would send me the original data and I would take a run through it. But it's a private.
And that kind of thing helped me a lot, by the way.
No.
And thanks for doing that.
I actually think it's okay to alter somebody else's image. And depending on the context of what you're doing, first off, if you're not doing anything with it, if you're not showing it off to anybody, fine, who cares? That's up to you. But there are certain areas, I was going to say forums, and forum may be exactly what I'm talking about, like on cloudy nights, when somebody says comments and criticisms, or, you know, what can I get out of this data, or something like that. I don't think you need to go to the extra trouble of asking them, hey, is it okay if I process it a little bit and then repost it and see, you know, and answer your question, what you can get out of this data?
Sure,
you know what I mean?
That's an invitation.
Yeah, I think so. So I think there is room for doing that. There have, on the other hand, been times where I've done what, who was it that Greg suggested, or who was it, I can't tell on the bottom of the screen there, where we go ahead and we just improve it. Don't go posting that just for the heck of it.
No, that's not cool.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 6 is it okay to selectively apply a tool only based on the criteria inherent to the data? In other words, we all know how to saturate, or we all know how to clone, or we all know how to do all that other stuff, brightness, color, scale. Is it okay to pick out certain sections and treat them one way and other sections to treat them a different way? Or is that, am I asking the question correctly? That came in from somebody else. I don't know who it was it came in from. Is it okay to selectively apply a tool based on the criteria inherent to the data, but never based on the user-defined selection?
So I look at that kind of as, well, first of all, let me answer the question, then go into detail. When I started out, I would say, no, that is not ethical. But as I've progressed, sometimes there's just something in the data that I want to get rid of on its own, and I'm going to process that particular imperfection or whatever it may be separately. The best example, the most common example that I would use for something like that, and I guess it depends on whether you're applying a process globally or selectively, but I would think that even though it's applied globally, reducing vignetting or any sort of background extraction or anything like that may, even though it's applied globally, be touching on that. But let's say I have a dust mode in there and I want to remove it, and I just need to remove it. I want to use the data. My flats didn't work on that particular mode for some reason. Yeah, I'm going to selectively remove it. I'm not going to, depending on how much time I have, and I reshoot the image. Years ago, I would have said, oh, no, you have to do everything globally and you want to treat it that way. But now I put so much time into my images that there's just certain things that I'm willing to do.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that apply? Like you know, we do tone mapping. We take the stars out and we process the nebulosity separately, and then the stars, and then put the stars back in. So according to this, you couldn't do that.
You know, we all do this all the time. Every time we mask and we adjust that mask, we do it. Every time we remove a gradient and pixinsight, we do this constantly. This is art. This is, you know, not science. If it were science, this would all be unethical. And as we learned at the AIC, which I was surprised to hear, is scientists are not allowed to stretch their images. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not scientists, so we do all sorts of manipulations selectively on different parts, by masking, by all sorts of selective processes that act on one part of the image and not the other. So
what is it that they say about sausage?
Yeah, well, there's 3 things you don't want to see being made: laws, sausages, and astro images.
Comments from chat are interesting. Max Miro, global versus local, which is really what comes into my mind when I'm thinking about it. But John Pancoast is saying, doesn't seem different than editing out a satellite trail. Mark basically isn't a curves adjustment, selectively changing things. Every change is really selective. Mark changing only the midtones and not the highlights. So you're making it non-linear, but you're doing it globally. So I'm more accepting of something like that. But that said, at this point, if you can remove a satellite trail by using a minimum filter or a paintbrush or and I think this is coming up, the heal tool or something like that, I may not have a huge problem with it.
No problem at all.
Right.
Okay, one of the ways to analyze it is if you're using a selective tool in order to correct a defect in the camera, or like a dust bunny, that's one thing. If you're using it to add something that wasn't really there, that may be another thing. So that's one of the considerations that you have to make. I think we're gonna have an opportunity to say these things over and over again in the next few issues that are coming up. So we will get to it. For instance, the next one is it okay to improve an image by removing or adding diffraction spikes?
I don't see any problem with it.
Yeah, are we adding them by tying string across the front of it, or are we painting them in?
Oh.
Or algorithmically, there are tools to add diffraction spikes.
See, I don't like fake diffraction spikes, but if you're using strings in front of the telescope, then it's not fake. It's actual diffraction.
But they weren't really there.
What if I have simulated wood on my car when I'm driving to the site?
Perhaps you
Alex, I don't understand
come
the comment
back to Earth and explain yourself there.
Putting string in front of the telescope is essentially the same as having a spider holding the secondary.
Right, but it's actually physically there, as opposed to something added in post-processing.
Right. No, Alex was saying that he didn't like the idea, or if I understood you correctly, that you didn't like the idea of putting strings on it. I mean, I don't like it either. I don't like diffractions.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Remember, the question is about adding or removing, because I know some people hate them and some people love them.
Well,
So
we're not talking about
let's not
liking.
go there.
We're not talking about liking or not liking.
Well, we shouldn't be. Yeah. Go ahead.
We're talking about, if it's ethical or to do it or not. I mean, yeah, some people like diffraction spikes, some people don't.
If you're reporting that you took it with an RC and people are saying, wait a minute, you should have diffraction spikes then, and you don't, you're not really realistically presenting what was hitting the sensor. Part of the picture was what came through the telescope. Now, true, dust bunnies are too. Dust donuts are too. And I already said that I think it's okay to remove a dust bunny, but that's changing the nature. Somebody help me out there. Finish that sentence for me. You see what I mean? It's like there's certain times when it might be okay to remove it, and there's other times that it isn't.
If it's a large area and you're removing a diffraction spike, it means you're replacing it with something else, and that something else is made up. You don't know what was really there. And this is perhaps what makes diffraction spikes a special case, is that you're generally talking about something that is big and bright. So there's no clue as to what was really there.
Is there room in this for intent? Like, is it really your intent to deceive, or does that matter, really? Is this an artistic touch-up? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a different way of looking at it.
And that art versus reality, if art is not real, is inherent in virtually all of these questions. So we could say that virtually every time, I think. There's a comment, though. David Frederick comes in with a very, very good point. Very confusing. You have a chat room on the AIC website and YouTube. I'm going to first off say, David, it's not quite as confusing as you think. It's more confusing because there is another chat room that you guys are not in on. It's when Google first started out, and even now, you can only put 8 people in what we call in the room. So these, how many people we got across here? 7 across, plus Adam up there. Okay, so those people got into the room. They have to get a special invitation beforehand, and it's basically the presenters and Adam and the people that he feels he needs to help run the program. They get an invitation, and we've got a group chat of our own over here. Then, for a long time, our chat came on the YouTube chat. But we found that well, I'm going to let Adam take this part from here. Adam, can you explain the difference between our chat, the YouTube chat, and where these people should be joining us tonight?
All right, I'll quickly and concisely. Best place to, well, the only place to get involved in chat is on our website, theastroimagingchannel.com. When you pull up our website, on the bottom right, you'll see a little bouncing chat thing, and click that. It'll open it up. You can pop out the chat, which means you can put it into a separate window. Then if you want to watch us on YouTube or wherever you really want to watch us from, you can have that separate window pop out so you can chat while you're watching, and that's basically it. Do not chat on YouTube. Pop over to our website because we do not pay attention to the YouTube chat. I think I try and get rid of it all the time, but for some reason it keeps popping back up. I don't know why. But the chat on our website allows us to share photos and all sorts of stuff. You can actually send private messages back and forth to other people in chat. So if you want to give your email to them but not people outside, gives you that opportunity. That's basically it.
So David, stay with us here over where you posted that comment about very confusing. This is where you should be. Don't go over to YouTube. It just got too hard to manage all the different chat things. So we got our own chat thing where it's much easier to manage. This chat thing, incidentally, can be saved. One of those buttons along the bottom of the left-hand panel tells you how to save it. Guillermo asks if there's a difference between adding diffraction spikes or removing them with flats. I don't know that you can remove a diffraction spike with flats anyway.
Removing dust.
Oh, removing dust bunnies with dust donuts. I see. Okay, it's very hard to see the difference. If you're talking about ethically and morally, yeah, there is a big difference. The dust imperfections or aberrations in those kinds of things are transitory. They aren't there. If you had clean optics, they wouldn't be there. And I think it's generally accepted that you can clean up your work. But adding diffraction spikes or removing diffraction spikes changes your work. And the question becomes, is it okay to change the work like that. Now, it's true, removing dust donuts with flats does change your work, but only to get it back to where it's supposed to have been in the first place. That's what I think the difference is.
Yeah, I'd almost say removing a diffraction spike, if you could do it, would be kind of cleanup. But then you're faced with the dilemma of, well, what was under it? And then now you're creating things. Adding them, though, that's a little stranger.
Okay. And where are we? Enough of the diffraction spikes. Besides, diffraction spikes have their own fans and non-fans. Combine pieces of frames to hide defects in one or more areas. Can you take a series of frames and then cut and paste the different parts together to hide defects in an area?
Well, if the defects aren't really there, if the defects are an aspect of an issue within the equipment, and you are actually reshooting an area within that to make up for the flub, so to speak, in your data, then nothing wrong with that. We do that all the time, right?
Well, that's called sigma clipping.
I'm sorry, you cut out, Tolga. What was that?
I mean, that's called sigma clipping. You know, that's what sigma clipping does.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I'm when I read that, I saw the part about well, what does AstroStacker do? But it divides an image into lots of different parts, and then takes the cleanest part of each of the sub-images, and then composites all those sub-images back into one major image. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's okay. That's getting the most out of your data.
I wonder if you're misunderstanding the question.
Whoever in the, I did, that wasn't part of my original, and I forget whose email sent it in. Is whoever it is in the room?
Alex, I'm thinking that it sounds familiar, and yet when I look at it, I have no idea what I'm thinking if it did come from me.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to something. Is it okay to paint missing color into an image by hand using a painting tool, for instance, and then paint the missing color in?
I would say at that point you kind of crossed the line.
Mm-hmm.
Enhancing a color, which is what we do all the time, but painting in color that's not there, that crosses the line, especially when you represent it to be the image, the way the data has been processed.
Okay. How about cloning?
Cloning what?
Cloning an image. Let's say you got, actually, I think this comes in, let's take 10 and 11 together. Cloning up an image or cleaning up an image by cloning, or replicating a minor star to correct star shape or size. Honest.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
Precisely,
I think
precisely why I asked the question. Cloning
yeah.
what?
Okay. I have seen tutorials on fixing stars where, let's say you've got a star that for some reason is misshapen. Here's one way to fix it. You go over and find another star of approximately the same size and that, and you clone it right on top of the ugly star.
That crosses the line for me.
I would never do that.
I've seen it. I've seen tutorials based on that.
I know. I've seen it too. My mouth dropped, and I don't know. I would like to hear other people's opinion on it, but I don't know. It sounds really weird to me.
Well, as odd as it sounds.
Is there anybody out there willing to disagree with Tolga?
Well, as a devil's advocate, I would.
You know what a devil's advocate does for a living, don't you? It tries to make sure that nobody ever gets to be a saint. So go for it, devil's advocate.
Let me say that I think of myself as an artist. I got into astrophotography through what I now call terrestrial photography. Okay. And I start out right from the beginning because I know people who do scientific imaging. I recognize, as you said before, that the first step you do, well, I mean, beyond calibration, you're going to stretch the image. Already, it's no longer scientific. Okay. And I view what I do as creating beautiful images using data from the skies as a starting point. Now, I don't actually fix stars, as this question suggests, not because I think it's unethical, but because I think it's inefficient. It's a really crude and time-consuming way to fix a star.
Okay, so I think the general consensus among us here is that no, that's really not what you should be doing. Okay, but it's okay to use a deconvolution routine?
Yeah, I think we do other things to make the stars more attractive. So we may do drizzle integration, which rounds out the stars a little bit. We may make the stars a little bit smaller with a Photoshop process or something in PixInsight. Cloning individual stars seems like a waste of time, but we certainly do a lot of things to make our stars look a little better. Even the way we stretch them makes them more or less colorful in the RGB layer. So we do lots of things to improve the look and feel and appearance of our stars. But cloning individual stars, I mean, why would I bother?
No, but we're talking about, like, you know, deleting a star and putting a star, or adding a star that's not there. I mean, I don't know how far you could go with this. I mean, if you say cloning a star, okay, can you add stars that are not there?
Yeah.
I mean, my problem with it is you're literally putting a different star, and I know we've killed the scientific value of it already, but the color of the star, not that the color is preserved scientifically, but the actual legitimate color of the star is different than what it should be.
What if you found another star that's exactly the same, like G2, whatever, G2V star, and you found another star from another image that you did 6 months ago, and you just copied and pasted it onto the other? I mean, we know we could do this, but, you know.
What if instead of that you mapped out where every star was and mapped out basically the size and the spread of the stars when they're nonlinear, and then you remove them all and basically just put in composite stars with the perfect star shape? To me, it seems like you're going too far, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can push it. You can take it to the extreme, and you can see where it would go too far. But I'll play the devil's advocate now. Background sky, I have no problem like cloning stuff out. Let's say there's a cosmic ray strike, or let's say there's like a just an odd reflection or something. I'd consider cloning that out. But the actual stars, I don't know. That's kind of like
you guys, when we heard Allred talking about how to protect your image, one of the techniques to protect your image is to add a little group of stars someplace that don't actually exist. And then if anybody copies your work, how do you prove they copied your work? You just point out that that group of stars doesn't exist to the judge, and thereby reap all the millions from your royalties. And I know that there are people in this room, in this very chat room, that have done something like that. And they may either speak up or forever cower in the corner.
No, I'll be glad to speak up. Yes, there are things in my image that I can trace back if I wanted to. And I think, Josh, you should speak up too.
He's cowering.
He's cowering.
Where'd he go? Josh, you out there?
I was looking for my mute button.
Okay. You were trying to mute me?
Yep, no, I write my name in stars throughout the image. In the images that I have stars, so.
So I'd like to ask you guys a question on this topic. Do you use tools to reduce the size of stars globally?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So I sometimes do, actually fairly often, now that I think about it. And the interesting thing about this is that it's kind of unethical just within our community, because we know that other astrophotographers are going to look at the stars as a measure of how sharp our image was. But if you are just shrinking the size of the stars, you haven't actually made, you know, details in nebulosity any sharper. But you know that your fellow astrophotographers are going to try and judge the sharpness by looking at the stars.
Well, it's really more complicated than that. The way you stretch your image depends on how much your stars are bloated, and there's various techniques to minimize the size of those stars, especially those that are blown out to begin with. But in the end, I think we all have tried to minimize or use tools to reduce the size of the stars if it appears that it's impacting the image. I see nothing wrong with that at all.
Can I call a timeout here? The next, we're going to get into some other things besides what we've been talking about. What we have been talking about is altering an image to make it look better through various techniques, adding diffraction spikes or removing them or whatever it was. And we're going to be talking about some other things here for a little bit. But let's look back. Adam, have you been monitoring the conversation? I wish Linda were actually in the room somehow. She's several points pointed out things, and she keeps emphasizing that, look, if you're doing science or photojournalism or reality, whatever that is, then some of these things aren't okay. But if you're making art, it's perfectly okay. And, you know, we're not going to tease anybody here. We're not going to fool anybody here. Yeah, we know that. Almost all these arguments come down to the same thing with intention and stuff like that. But Linda has pointed it out very well in several points throughout here. Mike and others have pointed out that, you know, there are other techniques that we use all the time that we may not be mentioning here, but they're basically changing the reality. Guillermo talks about the technique of removing stars, processing those nebulosity different than adding, or taking a different exposure and stuff like that. Yeah, we know that. It's all that same thing where we have an ethical dilemma, and it does underlie much of the discussion on ethics all the way through. I don't think there is a single answer on it, but please, you know,
yeah, we're not setting the rules here. We're just stating what our opinions are.
Yeah, if these were easy things, it'd be 10 commandments and boom, it'd be done. But even the 10 commandments sometimes get misinterpreted. So, all right, is it okay to point out the strengths and weaknesses of fellow astroimagers' work?
I think you remember when the Cloudy Nights, someone on Cloudy Nights said, if you want comments, type CC or C's and C's. If you don't want comments, don't type it. Well, I think it's a good way to go by it. If someone's inviting comments, then you can critique their work. Do it politely. Don't tear it apart, especially if they're a beginner. But and the more you know someone, the more you can be honest with them. But make sure it's constructive if you're going to criticize.
I'll disagree with you, Adam.
Go ahead.
I like this one. I do think obviously being constructive and being polite in your critiques is important, and you want to encourage people a lot. But I also do think that if you are posting an image publicly on Astrobin or wherever you're posting it, if you're posting it on Flickr or something, I think that, in my opinion, is an automatic invitation for critique of some form or another. If you are really, truly only doing it for yourself, you can post those things in private modes, either on Flickr or Astrobin, and keep it to yourself. But if you're posting and sharing with the community, then I just think that is automatically an invitation for some discussion regarding your image, especially if you're doing something like entering it in a place where it may be eligible for an award, which is all those same places as well.
So what you're saying is that if you put it in a place that asking for likes, get ready for dislikes.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be dislikes, but it can't. But certainly critiques. Yeah, I mean, if you're posting it publicly like that, then I guess what I don't understand is what is the purpose other than sharing. Now, sometimes maybe you're trying to share with just your family or just your friends or something, but there are different forums than astronomy-specific forums just to post them on and share them that way. So I don't know. I rarely would go on somebody's personal Facebook page if they posted a photo there and critique it there when, you know, their friends and families who have nothing to do with astronomy are talking about them. But if you're posting something on Astrobin or on Cloudy Nights or something like that, then I think that you're definitely putting it up for some sort of critique. Otherwise, I don't know why you would put it necessarily in that specific place.
Well, Josh, I'm going to have to disagree with you here a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, on Astrobin, we all know there are various levels of competence. And on many, if not most of those images, if we really wanted to dig into them, we can make some pretty harsh criticism, which I think serves no purpose whatsoever. I mean, what is the purpose of pointing out, gee, you didn't spend enough time, or boy, you didn't spend much time processing, or gee, that's a terrible image. If you have, you know, I don't want to go back to the old saw, if you have nothing good to say, you know, don't say anything. But basically, it serves no purpose to be harsh with someone on Astrobin or any other public forum. If you have something productive to say, which might help them out, then do it. Otherwise, you know, just keep your mouth shut, or if you have something more critical, send a PM, send a private message.
Maybe you're getting caught up in semantics then, because the word I said was constructive, and I think that it does need to be constructive, and at least I try to go by the philosophy, if I'm going to point out one thing that I think could be better, then I point out one thing that they do well on. But just saying, hey, you did terrible at this is never any help. So if you're pointing something out in somebody's image, and all of this is really subjective too, so they may or may not agree with it. They may or may not like your pictures or your ideas or anything like that. But if I have a comment, or if somebody else is commenting, what I would typically think would be a good way to comment on it is to say, hey, I noticed your black points are really clipped, your background's really dark. You may want to try to not clip that, and it'll give you more of like a natural look or something like that.
I mean, I kind of agree. I really save my terrible, harsh criticism for my friends.
Yes. Yep.
Well,
no, I agree
Adam,
with that.
Adam pointed out that you can say some things to somebody that you know pretty well that you wouldn't be saying it to other people, and he will say it, next to him, in the same room, or on a just in an email to him, then you wouldn't post on the forum. Okay, I'm gonna move on and put number 13, use HDR techniques to emphasize the tonal range of an image in favor of showing detail, texture in all areas. That's a very important question, but I think the analysis of whether it's fair, ethical, something we can do, fits into the same category as some of the topics we've already talked about. And in the interest of time, I'm going to bump forward a little bit and one of the next one. You guys all know what a Twan photograph is. I have always been under the impression that a Twan photograph was either a single exposure taking both the sky up above and the foreground landscape that's as a single exposure. Now, it may be a mosaic put together from panels of single exposures, but that it was never a situation where you took the ground in one set of exposures and the sky in another set of exposures, got the best out of both of them, and then somehow brought them together. I've actually written to the folks at Twan asking them this question about, did I make up that rule, or was I incorrect? I mean, I've talked to Twan photographers before, and I thought I knew what I was talking about. But I went to a presentation on Twan style photography, which was not at all consistent with what I thought Twan was. Is it okay for purposes of astroimaging, what we do, to take a background in one exposure and take the sky in a different exposure and then put them together? Or shall we move to number 15?
Sorry, I was muted. In my opinion, you should just basically say that it's a composite. And it actually bothers me that some astronomy magazines don't always point that out. I've seen it happen a few times. Whether it's composites or artistic renderings, they don't specify that. And I don't know. Then it makes it, the same rendering will make it into Time magazine or something. And I'll have a friend come up to me and say, oh, so they actually photographed a planet or an exoplanet, and it looked really good. And I said, well, it was probably a rendering, but
yeah,
doesn't make it that far.
Anybody else got any interest in that one? Is it okay to use other astroimagers' work in your presentations?
I think we do it all the time, but we try and point out, actually, credit's the important thing. If it's something they don't want shared, or they've asked you not to share, specifically, don't share it. If it's something they've published publicly and you're using it for educational purposes, then I don't see any issue with it.
And you're a nonprofit. And you're a nonprofit.
And you're a nonprofit. Right, correct. Okay, yeah. So if you are you are substituting an astro image for having to pay for some sort of clip art or anything like that, then no, that's not.
Okay, I grew up in the educational world. I was a teacher and stuff like that. And there's a free use permit, fair use permit that does allow you to use whatever you get, generally speaking. I did not know until I went to, on Sunday morning up at AIC, that actually that's for when you're doing it in person, it says, not when you're making some of the things we do here on the Astroimaging channel. So in that sense, some of the things I've done on the Astroimaging channel were not in compliance with that fair use document. And that's one of the things that I thought of interest. Linda, legally, it depends on the license of the work. If it's copyright, you need permission to use it. Well, Linda, it may be, and you're coming at it, from your background posts here, and that's all I know you from. You're a photographer and you've got some experience with that. But honest, I'm a teacher, and yeah, you can use stuff without getting fancy permission, even if it's copywritten in your classroom, okay? You can't necessarily reproduce it freely. There are some rules governing that, but if you're just bringing in a one-time demonstration of something, yeah, you can, there is such a fair use doctrine. There are things you can't go ahead and reproduce like that. But when I showed an image of Brad Jelena a long time ago on the Astroimaging channel, still brings a smile to Adam's mouth there. I didn't know that I would have to have their permission to reuse it or anything else like that. That's just not in my training. Okay. Is it acceptable? We're going on to some other things here. Acceptable to use an image without regard for north, south, or other orientation. And the person who submitted that says there is a near and far side to spiral galaxies. So if you have the near side oriented to the top, you may be showing it upside down. I'm not even sure I buy that premise. But the question about whether it's, is north always have to be up, etc.
I don't know, it
in
seems
planetary
like
imaging, I know that they, scientifically, in planetary imaging, they prefer south up.
Or did they used to prefer south up?
They publish their images south up. So I'm not a planetary imager, so I shouldn't really talk too much. But in deep sky imaging, I don't know if there's such a, you put it the way you want.
Mm-hmm. Which way is up, right? It depends on where you're standing on the Earth.
I know that there is there's a precedent set at where's that, Prague, the Astronomical Union. They suppose that since the Earth's north and the galactic north has a common north, even though they're off a little bit, but they're still kind of north. So there is an up in space,
No, there isn't.
scientifically speaking.
Yeah, but it's defined by the Astronomical League that changes its definition every now and then.
Right. So, right. But in our images, I don't know if it doesn't apply to our images.
I think you compose it. It's art. I mean, once you stretch that data, it's art, and you make it look good. I don't know that there is a top to a galaxy or a near side or a far side to the galaxy. Well, there's undoubtedly a near side and a far side, but I don't think it's determined by whether it's up or down.
Well, I think you're missing part of the question, and maybe it should have been different, because I'm not sure. The north up thing. I have a friend who always complains that I should make my images north up, and I just ignore him. But the thing about what is the right way to display a galaxy, and there are many other cases like this too, where there are cues to depth. For example, in looking at a galaxy, you have some occlusion going on there. In other words, things in the foreground are blocking the things behind them, and that tells you the direction. Because of our biases from living on Earth, we have normal ways of thinking about that. We want things that are farther away to be higher up in the frame. And you can actually use those things to get a stronger sense of depth in an astrophoto. And to do that, you have to ignore conventions about north being up.
I'm not sure I'm buying that, but okay.
I mean,
that's true.
Andromeda. Look at Andromeda Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a perfect example. Everybody puts that on a 45-degree angle on their sensor. That's not north up.
No,
and that's the de facto. Everybody does it that way.
No, but some people do put it upside down with regard to this artistic convention of the more distant side being up.
But what if the more distant side is down?
To what?
In reality.
No, what's reality?
What's
Earth horizon?
Reality is our view from Earth.
But
Yeah.
Your view from Earth is going to change depending on where on Earth you are, right?
Exactly.
Yes, the south of the equator is another issue I had with this question when I first heard it.
So like the thing about deep sky is it's so distant that the actual perspective doesn't change, only the rotation.
Well, the difference between the near side and the far side is a very small percentage of the distance from here to the middle or whatever. Okay, it's getting to be 7:42 on my clock, or 10:43, whatever it is back in the more populated part of the world. We get down finally to the item number 17. Actually, there were more put in at various times. Tolga added some a little later and others, but they, in some ways or another, while they may have offered different examples, repeated the same concepts that we've discussed. And I think that John Hayes's comment, which was number 17, probably summarizes more of what we'll all agree on than anything. It says, do whatever you feel necessary to improve an image, as long as you describe upfront how the data was acquired, how it was processed, and give the others involved proper credit. And I think that's probably a good summary of a lot of what we think of in this particular game. Let me see if I can paste that into the...
Yeah, I can vote for that, Alec.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I know we've gone a bit beyond our typical time.
By the way, I don't necessarily agree with what John says. I agree with the concept. I agree with the spirit. But, all that explanation can get lost before too long. And the moon, then Mars is bigger than the moon if you don't watch out. Okay. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did want to point out one thing. First of all, this is one of those conversations where and this happened, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years ago. and someone posted about it on Cloudy Nights, and the thread basically got locked immediately. Someone posted about it on one of the other astronomy forums and basically got blocked immediately. It was complete junk science, and anyone who thought about it in any detail knew, and that's why those posts got immediately removed from the internet. But this is probably the most egregious example of unethical photography, astronomy, imaging, whatever you want to call it. There was a website called spacenow.br. It was a Brazilian website, and they basically said that they had a technique for planetary imaging where they took, they showed us the raw data. They basically spelled out the process that they were doing on YouTube. They called it HMIR, which was an abbreviation for junk science. But basically, they took an out-of-collimation planetary video and stacked it, and then basically processed the heck out of it to the point where they showed detail on Mars, or excuse me, detail on Pluto that was better than any of the best satellites out there or anything like that. It was basically just, they basically processed noise and processed noise and processed noise until they had what looked like a planet. And then they claimed to have discovered ice volcanoes on Pluto and all sorts of ridiculous stuff. And you know what happened? They got published in all sorts of magazines and all sorts of newspapers, and they got picked up and it got spread all over the place. And he was invited on TV. And I'll tell you, anybody, like basically anybody that did any planetary imaging could say in an instant, this is junk. You would have a better chance at photographing one of the landers on the moon or Mars or anything like that than being able to actually resolve Pluto. But it's exactly what they were claiming to do. Fortunately, their website has disappeared from the internet, and I don't even believe their videos are on YouTube anymore. But that, I think, is epitome of unethical astroimaging. They got the science wrong. They got the honesty wrong. They basically got everything wrong. And it's one thing that stands out. If you want to be an ethical imager, you've got to basically do the opposite of what they are. Put everything on the table, be honest, but don't claim to be doing things you're not. And if you're dabbling in science, as I'll call it, it's important not to make dramatic or untrue claims. It's better to say nothing than to say something that might be wrong. So that's, I don't know, that's what I wanted to point out. I don't know if any of you guys remember this space now, but at the time it drove me.
I do remember, Adam, I do remember seeing, and hello, Alex. I do remember seeing images of canals on Mars that were done by Percival Lowell. And, you know, so you got to really watch out how much you're reading into a subject. And, you know, they're real to a lot of people, those canals on Mars. Okay, I thought that was a good discussion, and we're all still friends, aren't we, guys?
Yeah.
And ladies and everybody that was on this. There were a couple of technical issues about how the Astroimaging channel is presented. One comes from Israel Gil. They can't have both the windows open at all. I don't know if you're actually, Israel, trying to watch us on YouTube itself, but go to theastroimagingchannel.com and watch the show from there. And you can have on the same window showing at the same time, you can have the chat screen and the image, you know, and you can see our wonderful faces at the same time. So you don't have to have two windows open, or at least as far as I can understand, you don't have to have them both open at the same time. Secondly, later on, McClancy or McKeansey, 56, asked if he wants to get in, he wants to get invited to the discussion on Google Hangouts. The way you get on that list of people that get invited into the Hangouts in the first place is to do a presentation, because that list is composed mostly of people who have done presentations on the Astroimaging channel. It does give you access that it's not all that special anymore because of this wonderful chat system that we do have set up. But if you'd like to give a presentation, contact Adam. He's got some people that are contacting him now, I know. Warren said he'd be back for a presentation, and Tolga's going to tell us about CCD Commander, I think, and I keep promising I'm going to finish up my presentation on statistics, and we'll be getting that to you, and Adam may have more, but we can only put 8 people in this room before Google quits on us. So we can't invite everybody out there. We'd love to have you. There was a couple of people, like I could see how active you were involved typing things in over here. It would have been so nice to have you just being able to say stuff, but the technology's not there. Okay. So is there anything else we need to cover from all of this over here today? Tolga, what was the point of the what is that, a globular you posted here? Tolga, find your mute button, unmute yourself. Is Tolga still? Yeah.
Are you talking about the YouTube video I posted on the chat box? Yes, that's a discussion. There's a very good channel on YouTube. I actually recommend it very highly. It's called Deep Sky Videos, and one of the videos it's about which way is north.
Which way is north?
Yeah. In space. And that was just a little video of one of the professors over there talking about what I was saying before, was that professional astronomy, they do have a north in space. It was just if anybody was interested, they could go watch that video. But she's so humble of really describing what she means. Anytime, you know, scientists talk about stuff, they really like to, you know, tell you the how much they don't know. You know, you know, the error factor of their assumption. So she's so humble describing what north is, and I thought it was related.
Yeah, there actually is a definition for north, and it involves holding your thumb. Where's my camera? There we go. Holding your thumb like that, and when you hold your right hand out like that, your thumb points north, and your finger points in the direction of east. That's by definition. So if there is anything that is rotating, it has to be rotating before it can have a north. But you point in the direction of rotation, and your thumb is pointing north, and your fingers are pointing east. Okay, so there is a definition of north, and if a galaxy is spinning, there is a north, and everything has its. But they cheat on that definition, particularly with solar system objects and non-solar system objects, and the direction of rotations. I could give the whole hour-and-a-half presentation that I have given at Sequoia and various astronomy clubs on which way is north. It's really a cute presentation. Alas, our time is up. Adam, it's over to you.
All right. Well, that sounds like a cool conversation that we'll have to have at a different time. This is one of those times that we did kind of chat on forever, but I like the topic. So maybe we will revisit something like this in the future before too long. But Tolga will be presenting next week on CCD Commander. And after that, we are looking for other presenters. So if you guys have any ideas, let me know. Otherwise, we'll be searching everywhere we can. That said, thanks for watching. We will see you next week. Don't forget to submit for Image of the Week. And, well, that's basically it. Good night, guys.
Good night.